Welcome to Irwin Data Modeler Tool Training. This collection of courses is meant to get you up to speed quickly with Irwin Data Modeler. In this course, we will continue digging into the deeper capabilities of Irwin Data Modeler, those that go far beyond boxes and lines. We'll begin with forward engineering. Forward engineering, or FE, is the activity of building a database schema from a data model, model-based system development. We'll work with a tiny, simple schema to emphasize a specific work sequence. There's nothing magic about this sequence, but I suggest that you have a sequence. The process requires us to select from dozens of options. This is true of other operations in Irwin Data Modeler. It's important that we be able to perform these operations in a repeatable way. Therefore, we'll learn how to save and reuse these option sets in many areas of Irwin Data Modeler. One of the first things we need to know about schema generation is that it is controlled by the active subject area. If you'll check the title bar here in Irwin DM, you'll see we're in the subject area named Book. You can also see it in the Model Explorer. Subject area is Book at the top left. If we choose to generate a schema from the subject area Book, we activate Book, and the most we can get in our DDL script is everything in this subject area. Now remember, what we see here in this diagram is not necessarily everything in the subject area. Everything in this diagram must be part of the subject area, but everything in the subject area doesn't need to appear in every diagram. Remember, when we build the subject area, we can include the tables we want to. So we might include a table that is a parent, but without including its children. We might include a table that's a child of another table without including its parent. Relational database management systems do not like trying to generate a foreign key constraint with a table on only one end. So we need to take care of that in our subject area editor. Let's take a look in the subject area editor for the subject area Book. On the General tab, near the top left corner, we have a checkbox labeled Filter Dangling Relationships from Schema Generation. And a dangling relationship is what I described just before. It's a relationship that's connected only on one end. So that relationship, that foreign key constraint, we may be showing only its parent or only one of its children, but not everything. Well, we don't want to try to generate that dangling relationship, so we check the box. This is the only case I know where the word filter in Irwin Data Modeler means don't include this. Usually filter in Irwin Data Modeler means include this, filter this in. In this case, it means filter this out, filter from. Not a big deal, but it sure can be confusing. We'll close that dialog. And from the Actions menu, select Forward Engineer, Schema. A lot going on in this dialog. 3 big tabs, Options, Summary, and Comment. Let's start with the Options tab. The options are hierarchical. We have 2 lists here on the screen. And in this hierarchy, the list on the left shows a category of options. And in the list on the right, we see the option details with the category name at the top. The second category of options is server options. We're going to select none of those. Database, our database already exists. Schema, we have no schema level options. On the left, table. And on the right, we're going to create tables, but nothing else. And if that table we're trying to create already exists, we're going to drop it and then create it. On the left, the column category. On the right, we're going to generate the columns in physical order. And that, if you recall, corresponds to a choice we have in Irwin Data Modeler. The logical side of our model is displayed in logical order, attribute order. But on the physical side of the model, we can display in physical order, which is the order in which we want the columns generated. So if physical order is different in this model from the attribute order, the logical order, we're going to choose physical order. No views, although we have views. There's 2 of them in our subject area, 2 of them in our diagram, actually, and 2 in the subject area. Indexes, we're going to create only alternate keys and inversion entries. And we're going to drop, if they already exist, alternate keys and inversion entries. Inversion entry is a non-unique index. Referential integrity. This is declarative referential integrity, and we're going to ask for primary keys using the option to generate an alter table. We're going to generate foreign keys with on delete and on update options, and unique alternate keys. Triggers, nothing. All the trigger choices are cleared. Other options. Well, I think the constraint names is handy, and some of these options in the other categories will change depending on your target DBMS. We're targeting SQL Server 2008. There is an option at the bottom of other options called Run Check Model. We're going to take a look at Run Check Model in another module of this course. Once you see what that does, you'll probably want to check this box. But we don't want to check it now. We just want to keep it as simple as we can. Well, that's a lot of boxes. Let's take a look at the Summary tab. And here we see all of those categories and all of the options in each category summarized in tree format. And the tree's expanded just as much as it needs to be. Irwin Data Modeler is pretty smart in this. There's our create table, drop table if needed, generate columns in physical order, and so forth. Nonetheless, there are lots and lots of options. I want to make a comment about this option set. Simple schema. Because I have so many options to choose, and because, see, this might be a pretty handy option set to reuse, I'm going to save it. Up at the top, option set. I have an option to open a stored option set, save this one, save as. Let's take a look at save as. Notice that we have two choices on the left to select a destination. XML file, that's the one we're going to use, or we could save the schema generation options directly into this model. But I would rather choose an XML file because that will let me use the same option set with other models. It's going to be a separate file. I can save it with other modelers. We can build a set of reusable standard options for schema generation, a wonderful thing. And we're going to see a lot of option sets from here on as we work in the advanced operations of Irwin Data Modeler. XML file, let me browse. And I'm going to name this XML file FVSQL08-simple. That's just my naming standard. You don't have to follow anything. But since we're going to be having many different option sets for many different uses, I think it's handy to note what is the use of this option set. It's FE, forward engineering. Well, what makes this option set unique? Well, the first thing is that it targets SQL Server 8. Well, okay, what is it that makes this particular option set different from any other FE SQL 8 option sets? Simple. Push the save at the bottom right. I already had a copy. Let me overwrite that, and we'll close. Down at the bottom, there is a whole fistful of buttons. Notice just above the button row on the left, there's a table filter, 6/17. This means there are 17 tables in our model, and right now we're set to generate 6 of them. Well, let's take a look at this filter. And we're back to the word filter, meaning filter to include. On the left, we say a table pool. This amounts to a list of the tables that are available but are not included at this time. And a table pool is determined by the subject area we're in. We're in book, but all of the tables and views in book are on the right. They're included. They're filtered in. So our table pool is empty. We have no more that we could choose from. Everything's already selected. Very handy. I can push these back and forth, left and right. I'm not going to be generating views, so I can select the 2 views and move them to the left and close. There's an owner override. That refers to schema owner. Let's skip the preview button. We're going to come back and do some work with that in just a couple of minutes. There's a print button. I'll bet you can guess what that does. The report button simply generates the schema into a file and lets us save the file. The generate button asks us to connect to a database if we're not already, and generates, according to our option set here, a schema into the system catalog. And there's an OK button and a cancel button at the bottom right. So why do we have a preview button? Well, let's push it. SQL Server Schema Generation Preview. This shows our DDL script. It's in a particular order, the order that's required. So we don't get the referential integrity until all the way to the bottom. Foreign key constraints are down at the bottom. Have to make sure all the tables are created. Before we try to create anything, we drop stuff that might already exist. Okay, toolbar at the top right of our preview dialog. There's a little diskette button. I can push that to save. Just what I could have done. Let me move this up a little bit. Just what I could have done earlier in the parent dialog with the report button. So preview, first of all, gives me a chance to look at the script before I commit it to a file. I have search and search again and replace. Cut, copy, and paste. Buttons on the bottom. Table filter now is 4 of 17 because I moved those two views back to the table pool. We're not going to try to generate views, though, at this time. Didn't need to do that. The schema generation options would have taken care. Didn't need to move those views back, but I wanted to show you how that worked. Buttons at the bottom right, generate and close. Well, if I push generate right now, take a look at my cursor way up the top. I'm going to generate everything from the cursor down. That would be the whole schema. Well, I could have done that back on the parent dialog just with the generate button. So what's the big deal about preview? Preview is interactive. Let me search for the table PUBLR. That's what I'm going to be generating. I'm just going to generate a single table. Find next. Drop table publisher. Well, I know that it doesn't exist. So let me find next. Create table book. Oh, there's a foreign key in the table named book. That's not what I want. I'm looking for create table publisher. I could have typed that into the find field, but I'm devious and I want you to see how this goes step by step. Here we go, create table publisher. I'll cancel the find now. And I'm going to highlight this complete statement for create table publisher, all the way from the create down to the go. Go is the statement delimiter in SQL Server. If we were in Oracle here, we'd see a semicolon. I've highlighted create table publisher. Therefore, the most I can possibly get in my schema, in my database, is a single table called publisher. It's going to have these columns. They're going to have these data types. Oh, so that's handy. Using preview, I can run these statements one at a time. Generate the database objects kind of one at a time. Now I'm going to have to remember the sequence in which I'm doing this, but this can be extremely handy. Let me push the generate button at the bottom right and we'll see how we move from diagrams to databases. SQL Server is asking me to connect now, and I'm going to connect to the database that I want to generate my schema into. That's on a server dot, which is a local server, / SQL Express. The database is course. And you notice I have some recent connections. There's history at the bottom. Connect. Oh, here comes an error message from SQL Server. This is a wonderful thing. In this course and other courses, we pointed out a number of errors that could be made, but which Irwin Data Modeler won't find, won't complain about. For example, way back when we were talking about constraints, validation constraints and default constraints. One of our choices on validation constraints was just to have a list of valid values. And then the default constraint allowed us to choose anything we wanted, whether it was on the list of valid values or not. It didn't even have to be the correct data type. In fact, none of the values on a valid values list for a validation constraint have to be a valid data type. Irwin doesn't check. Well, that seems like a big shortcoming in Irwin Data Modeler, but it's not at all. Imagine if Irwin Data Modeler had complete debugging capabilities for all of the relational database management systems that Irwin supports. That would be crazy. But using the preview choice at forward engineer schema generation time, we can utilize the debugger for our target DBMS, and that's exactly what we've done here. Microsoft SQL Server tells us, oh, length in line 4, so that's line 4 of the failed query, the failed statement, which is the one that's showing here, but we could have run many statements successfully and then suddenly stopped when we got here. Notice the option at the bottom left here, stop if failure. Line 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, so we're in the line, publisher name. It says length or precision, specification 0 is invalid. Yeah, look at the data type. char 0. Nope, SQL Server doesn't like that. Irwin never complained. Irwin would have complained if we had run that check model which won't catch every error, but catches a lot of straightforward things and some not so straightforward. Okay, we're going to abort schema generation at this time, down at the bottom right, and OK. Takes us back to the preview, where we're going to fix our problem. I'm going to change that data type from char of 0 to varchar with a maximum width of 80. Now, since that generation failed, we don't have a table out there. We don't have to run a drop table first. I'm just going to try this one statement again. Create table publisher, generate. And I see schema generation complete. One query succeeded. OK. And go take a look at SQL Server. Here we are in SQL Server Management Studio, nice graphical user interface. Notice we're in the server./SQL Express. Databases, there's the course database. Tables, we'll need to refresh. Here's our table publisher. Columns. Wonderful, there's publisher name, varchar 80. It all happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. That is a beautiful thing. And back to Irwin DM. Several items is what makes the preview choice at schema generation so valuable. It's interactive. Just for giggles and grins, let me remove the statement that did succeed. And I'm going to try to run everything else all the way up to the top. I don't need my drop table publisher. I don't really need any of these drops. I can remove them. Notice the interactive preview here. Just because I deleted my create table publisher and I deleted all these drops up at the top, they will still appear in the schema. They'll still appear in my script when I get out of this preview mode that I'm in. They'll still be in my model. No changes that I make here in preview are going to affect the model in any way. When I go back to the model, we're going to see that publisher name is still a char of 0, not a varchar with a maximum width of 80. So I've deleted the stuff that I don't need. I've deleted the stuff that already succeeded, that one create table. And I've positioned my cursor all the way to the top. Now, I could continue to do these things one at a time, but I'm brave, I'm bold. Up the top and generate. Oh, there we've got a problem with line 11. Another char 0 problem. I'm going to ignore that and continue. Alter table authorization, add constraint. There's a problem. I'll continue. I'm just going to force this schema to generate one way or another, just so we can see what kinds of messages we can get back for the errors that remain in our model. And we see we have a lot of opportunities here for SQL Server to fix our model. It's going to fix our script. Then we'll have to go back and manually fix the model. But later on in this course, in another module, we're going to see how we can use a corrected database to modify the model and bring it up to where it should be. Let's just continue and we'll go past all these. There we go. 8 queries succeeded. 3 queries failed. Schema generation is complete. Where it says execution successful, it's referring to the most recent attempted statement. Let's push OK to get out of here, out of the debugger. And let's go back and look at our database now. Once again, under tables, right-click and refresh. Book year-to-date sales, publisher. So we don't have all of the tables that we're trying to generate, but we had all the ones that succeeded, for which our queries succeeded. We have keys, have indexes. It's a beautiful thing. I hope by seeing this preview, along with the capabilities of this forward engineer, the schema generation, the ability to do the option sets and get this so that we can do these very quickly, the ability to save the script, print it as a report, all those. I hope you see the value in generating a test schema from Irwin Data Modeler directly, just to pull into the process the debugger for our target DBMS. Very, very, very powerful. Okay, I'm going to close the preview. Back to our parent dialog, forward engineer schema generation. And I'm going to push the OK button. Frequently, people will get to here and they say, well, I'm done. I'll push cancel. The problem with that is all these options, even if we did not save them as an option set, the option settings would be sticky. By that I mean the next time we ran forward engineer schema generation, we would see the same option choices that we made the previous run. That can be handy. But if you push the cancel button, you lose all those. You come back into the regular starting state of option settings, which probably isn't exactly what you want. May not even be close. But by pushing the OK button, I'm going to make certain that I begin, even if I don't do the save of the option set and reopen the option set, I'm going to begin with the same choices I left in place. OK? And that's it, from diagrams to databases. I think that's a wonderful thing. Often we need to make just a few changes in our model and push them out to the schema. Irwin Data Modeler facilitates this with an easy process for generating alter scripts. We've been using our database for a while, and experience has shown that we just don't have a big enough space to record book name. We're going to need to change a data type in book. Let me open the column editor, and for book name, instead of varchar 80, let me change that up to varchar 100 and close. Notice our action log shows we've set a column property, changed it from 80 to 100. Well, do we have to re-engineer the whole database? No, we just want just a little alter script. So from the Actions menu, Forward Engineer, Alter Script. We're going to use the same saved option set that we used before, that FESQL08-simple. And let's use the preview button. I'm very fond of it. We're checking the model. Anything wrong with book? Purchase order? No, book's not in there. Here we are. Alter table book. Alter column, 100. And we're also going to rebuild the index. Now, if this index already existed, we're going to have trouble when we try to generate. Or we don't have selected in our option set the option to drop indexes. So let me close this for just a minute. Go back here to our option set. And under indexes, we'll drop an index instead of letting SQL Server say, hey, you can't do that. You already have that. And now we see at the top of our alter script, drop index. So Irwin Data Modeler will generate this alter script based upon what it finds in the action log for this current session. It will also generate whatever else it thinks is going to be necessary. For example, this index. We had a column named book name, and we also had an index that included that column book name. So obviously we're going to have to rebuild that. But that index already exists in the database. We have to allow for Irwin DM to say, if it already exists, drop it, and then we'll rebuild it. Very cool. We could push the generate button, but you've already seen that. We beat that drum pretty hard in the preceding demo. So that's it. Alter scripts, courtesy of Irwin Data Modeler. My sequence here is backwards. Ordinarily, I'd want to check the schema before I generate the schema. However, I needed to show you how forward engineering works first of all. Now, let's see how to check the model. In the first and second demos of this module, we noticed this Run Check Model option in the option set for schema generation. This option set also controls the way the alter script was generated in the preceding demo. Well, let's see what this check model is, and we'll see that we don't have to wait until this point in the process when we're ready to generate a test schema. Again, the Actions menu, Forward Engineer, Check Model. Number of objects, number of messages, 13 messages. Precision/width for the column payment terms. Well, that's another one of those char zeros. Data type char. We have those all through our model because somebody didn't assign the correct domain. They left it as the default domain for all these columns. You get other kinds of messages here. Notice about our views. It's suggesting kind of performance issues. A unique clustered index needs to be created for V author privacy and another one for V publisher book. And the check model will often suggest indexes. You can run this at any time. You don't have to be in the middle of a schema generation. I think this is the third or fourth demo out of several courses where I've made a point about the default domain. It's very handy. I mean, how would you assign a domain when you first create the column or the attribute? So the default domain is assigned, but we can't leave it there. And we've looked at a number of ways of trapping it. This is probably the ultimate way. When we set the default domain to have a data type of char0. Do you remember another place you can change that or set that? Yes, in model properties. This is a model-wide property. So model properties editor on the defaults tab. Logical data type default is char0 and physical data type default char0. We don't want to leave those default domains. You never know what a default means. Does it mean that, well, I forgot to check that one? We don't know. Just don't trust defaults. It's handy to have that check model option in our forward engineering option set. Check model can't find everything possibly that's wrong with the model, but it doesn't have to either if you run at least a test schema generation through the forward engineer schema generation preview option. But that's it for check model. And that's it for forward engineering. You should be equipped now to explore even more on your own. Irwin Data Modeler lets you customize your schema in several ways. Let's explore one of these techniques, sometimes called prescripts and postscripts, depending on their effect on the DDL. I say that because this is our first real look into Irwin Data Modeler's multipurpose macro programming language. We're going to use Irwin DM macros to do one particular automatable model building task for us, building single table views. We're going to see the terminology prescript and postscript. A prescript is a script that will generate into the DDL before something, and a postscript will generate into the DDL post or after something. A table-level model script targets individual or a subset of the tables. So we would have a table-level prescript that would run before the create table for a particular table or particular group of tables. And a table-level postscript will run after that table or tables has generated. Scripts that run at the schema level will appear either before everything else all the way up the top of the script, or post after everything else all the way at the bottom of the script. This is the flexibility we need. Model scripts use a combination of plain vanilla SQL and Irwin DM macros to accomplish a huge variety of tasks. We're going to put these scripts to use to build single table views. Here's our scenario. Single table views are often used to control privacy and security. And in fact, we thought so much of this once upon a time in our construction of this publications model that we built a view called V Author Privacy. And we put in information about the author that we didn't want every application to have access to or every person to have access to. I remember a case of a large Canadian bank with a model of about 800 tables, and they needed single table views for roughly 300 of those tables. Single table view is just a view with that one table as the base table. But from the view, we can either leave out all the privacy information and then access the view in the applications, or we can include only the privacy and security information in the view. So you have your choice of how you want to use the single table view to implement security and privacy. Anyway, the question from a colleague was, can we do this with a model script? So I wrote the script, sent it on. While the customer was watching, my colleague created over 300 single table views in about 20 minutes. Very impressive. So in our model, at least the subject area, or rather the diagram that we're looking at here, remember our subject area is book. That's the one we've been working with here in the last couple of demos. In this diagram, publisher might have some privacy and security issues. Book, no. Book year-to-date sales, well, I think that whole table needs to be controlled. So we don't need a view to represent a subset of the columns in the table. So let's target publisher, and we'll be able to leave things out. For example, like the street address, the city, the state, the zip code, just have the publisher identification and the publisher name in our single table view and use the view where we need privacy, where we need security. So let's see how to go about creating such a script. In general, these scripts are going to build DDL, customize our DDL. From the model menu, I'll select Script Templates. And here we have another guided editor. I'm going to build a new template. And I'll name this template Single Table View. There are two types of these model scripts, model level or table level. And the type is determined by how the script gets implemented. Does it get implemented as something that applies to the entire schema, or the entire model, in other words, or does it get implemented as something that applies table by table, maybe to just one table or a subset of the tables in the schema? We're going to make this a table level script. Next choice, generate as either post-creation or pre-creation. The creation that we're talking about here is the creation of the table. This is a table level script. So if I'm going to build a view on the base table publisher, that view has to show up in our DDL script after the create table for publisher. We can't make a view until we already have the table that's going to support it. So this is post-creation. You may have heard of these scripts in addition to being called model scripts. You may have heard of them called pre-scripts and post-scripts, and that's where this comes from. There's an option to attach to new. That means if we check that option, this view will be attached to every new table that's created in the model. No, we don't want that. And there's an option to generate. If we uncheck the generate option, we could leave the script here in the model, but not generate it, not see it take effect at schema generation time. And then whenever we need it, we can come here and turn it back on. We're going to leave it checked, generate. I'm just going to copy and paste the script rather than taking the time to type it in, and we'll go through it item by item. Create view, that's familiar. That's just SQL, as, select, and from. But then I see a bunch of things here with percent signs in front of them. As I mentioned in the introduction to this module, we're on a voyage of discovery here because we're going to be examining these commands really for the first time. And yet we're going to see them over and over and over again. It is an amazingly powerful part of Irwin Data Modeler. Percent table name is a command that if we pass it, if we point it at a table and say percent table name, it will return the name of the table. So we have to learn which of these commands applies where and kind of how to point them at the various objects in the model. We have 190 something macro commands. It's going to help us if we have some access to part of the help system. Now the full help system, pull down the help menu and type in macros. You'll find really a terrific introduction. It presents the macro language as you would expect to present any kind of a programming language. How do I declare a variable? How do I set the value for a constant? How do I increment or decrement a variable? How do I branch? How do I spin a loop? I can't think of any place right now that you can use macros that you don't have access to the macro toolbox. And here on the Code tab, in the bottom section of our SQL Server Script Template Editor, in the Tool buttons, the button fourth from the left is supposed to represent a little toolbox, and that's called the Macro Toolbox. Let me push on that button, and we launch the Macro Toolbox. We're going to leave it open. The Macro Toolbox is non-modal. In other words, we can leave it open and go back and work in our editor. Let's take a look at the toolbox. On the left, we have categories of macros. Now, the top category is labeled Entity Macro, but you'll also find Table Macros there. And if we expand it, scroll down through, and here's our percent table name. Now, before I click on that, take a look. This panel in the middle, labeled Description, is really an example. And that example is going to be based upon this miniature little model over here in the right panel. Movie copy is rented under 0, 1 or more movie rental records. So on the left, select table name, percent table name, and you see the syntax, basic syntax up at the top, percent table name. It expands in this case as, for example, movie rental record. Usage. Now these usage comments are suggestions. They're not limitations. They're just examples. But we see that if we point percent table name at a table, it returns the name of that table. So create view, there's our percent table name. What about this V underbar before percent table name? Well, it doesn't have a percent sign in front of it, therefore it will be interpreted as literal. Percent table name. Well, percent table name takes several parameters. If you want to see the full syntax, you'll need to look in the larger macro help, the full macro help, not just the toolbox. But it takes a number of parameters. This first comma in the parameter list, surrounded by parentheses, means only that the first parameter is missing. We don't have anything to enter there. Then there's a comma and a space to separate the second parameter. And the second parameter is the separator. So we're going to have multiple parts, potentially, in this table name list. And the separator between columns will be a comma. No space, just everything between the double quotes. And then what? What's the third parameter? Well, it's surrounded by curly brackets. So this generally means there'll be a list. And a list of what? Percent column name, percent COL name. Back to the macros, the macro toolbox. We need to take a look at percent for each column, first of all. Here's basic syntax and a basic syntax example. Percent for each column, paren, and then some macro code. So we're expecting one of the arguments to be another command or string of commands. And finally, percent table name is closed. The argument list is closed with a parenthesis. Okay, understandable? And the DDL continues with as select. Another percent for each column, so we're going to spin through the list again. Our from clause, just the name of the current table. And a command percent dbmsdlim. Well, in the macro toolbox, let's look that up. That's down here at the bottom under miscellaneous macro. Some of these are just interesting. Look at that percent current file, percent current database, percent current user, percent current server. There is percent dbmsdlim. Returns the database management system's statement delimiter. So if this script were being used in a model that's targeting Oracle, percent dbmsdlim would return a semicolon. Since it is included here in a model that is targeting SQL Server, percent dbmsdlim should return the word go. So not only are these scripts, if they're well constructed, reusable model to model, they're reusable DBMS to DBMS. So if you're careful, you can build a script that works with a huge variety of DBMSs and many, many, many models. One difference between the two percent for each column loop spinners. So we're going to go through the list of columns in the table, whatever table name returns, and we're going to return the column name. In the first use of percent table name, we have a parenthesis at the end of our statement, and that parenthesis is missing from the second use of percent for each column, because we don't want a parenthesis at the end of that list. Interesting, eh? I wanted to walk through that carefully and slowly for you. Then I'm going to select the expanded tab in the bottom of our editor, and we see the expansion of the code. Notice on the expanded tab at the top right corner, there's a field called context. I'm going to drop that down and change from auth to publisher and maybe blow this up in the editor a little bit. There we go. That's our particular table. Now, once this view is created, of course, we just edit out whatever columns we don't want to include in the script, or we can edit out the columns, leave only the columns we do want to include. But that's rapidly done, especially if we do it in a model. And I'll OK or cancel out of that. The context field applies only as a test. It does not attach the script to any table. If you stop here, nothing much is going to happen in your DDL script. We need to take it another step. This is a table-level script. It must be attached to one or more specific tables. Where do we do that? It's not really obvious. But up at the top part of the editor, the button that's second from the right, which gives you direct access, by the way, to the help system for macros. Second to the right end is Script Template Browser. Push that, and here's our template. Template code is empty. We have a field that shows the script On the left, we have a list, an attached object. Let's pick Publisher. On the right, we have a list of attached objects. Let's just push Publisher over to the right. And now we've attached our object called Single Table View. Now that the object is attached, if I click on it again, I will populate the template expansion at the bottom. It's not as nicely formatted as we saw earlier, but it gives us an opportunity, especially if we were to also attach, say, the auth or author table. So this is where the attachment of our script to one or multiple specific tables in the subject area takes place. And when I'm happy with this, I push the close button at the bottom right. Notice, by the way, let me temporarily change this from a table level script to model level. See what happened? The script template browser button is now grayed. It's not available because if in a model level script, the script is automatically attached to every table in the model. And we only wanted it attached to Publisher at this time. All right, I will close this. Notice, by the way, in the Model Explorer, we have our new script template, Single Table View. Let's see how this works at schema generation time. From Actions, Forward Engineer, Schema. We're going to use our friendly example option set that we built earlier. Notice, as before, for the category of options View, I don't have any options selected. Even if I check Create View, I won't get it. It should be right after my Create Table for Publisher. Get V Author Privacy, V Publisher Book, but no Publisher. Notice the other options here in the View category, Prescript and Postscript. Let me check Postscript. See if that'll do it with the Preview button. Alter Table Publisher. Nope, that doesn't do it either. Well, this is not a View script. This is a table script. Let's try that. Table Postscript. And under View, we have nothing checked. Push the Preview button. Create Table Publisher. Alter Table for the constraint. And there we are. Create View. V Publisher. That is a beautiful thing. I'll close and OK out of my schema generation options. Notice that the new view, V Publisher, well, we didn't generate it. And it doesn't show here in the model either. How would we get it into the model? Well, we could actually reverse engineer that part of the script. We haven't done it yet, but we're about to. This is a wonderful, powerful, vastly underutilized capability of Irwin Data Modeler. Fun, right? That's just a tiny hint of the things you can do with model scripts. I hope you enjoy exploring them further on your own. You will be a hero with your colleagues. We don't want to deep dive into how to write triggers themselves. That's definitely far beyond our scope here. Triggers are just pre-compiled procedures that have limited capabilities compared with stored procedures. But we can fire them whenever we take action to insert, update, or delete. So we often use triggers for referential integrity, when declarative RI is just too limited. Our focus will be how to work with Irwin Data Modeler's support for triggers, the template concept, how the editors work. We'll work at general purpose table triggers later. So let's take a look first at the referential integrity trigger support in Irwin Data Modeler. From the Model menu, take a look at RI Trigger Templates. When you work with Irwin Data Modeler, you're going to become familiar with templates. Templates for all kinds of things. Later on in this course, we'll see templates that control the way that Irwin interprets the model into the DDL script, the way it translates that, and how controllable that is. So a template is reusable code that you and I can access and modify if necessary. Here we are with the SQL Server Trigger Template Editor. Why SQL Server? Well, that's the relational database management system, see down in the status bar, that this current model targets. Up the top, we have a list of trigger templates, child delete cascade, And you'll notice a number of them are child, and then there's some custom, delete footer, insert footer, and then parent, update footer, update header. So right away you understand there might be an overall trigger template that's constructed from pieces, and that is correct. Up at the top right corner, I want to notice a filter. Filter to include, almost always in Irwin, so I'm going to filter to include parent. And now my list of trigger templates includes only those that begin with the word parent. Right up at the top of the parent list is Parent Delete Cascade. Click on that, please, to select it. And I'm going to click on New. I'm going to build a new trigger template. Now what I really want to do is change what's in Parent Delete Cascade. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But in fact, you can't change these built-in trigger templates. You have to make copies of them and edit those. Tell it yes. Okay, now let's find that new one. Uh-oh, not here. Our filter is still set. So let's remove that filter. Now we'll scroll around, and there's our new one. Trigger template 1028. I'm going to rename this as plus, and I've just put a plus sign in front of all my edited trigger templates. PDC for Parent Delete Cascade. Now let's look at the bottom section of the editor here. Notice a couple of buttons on the toolbar. Sort items, because we can have a lot of stuff in this list. And rebind. The rebind button will take any new template code that we have associated with a referential integrity type and bind it throughout the model, wherever that RI type is called for. Well, we don't need the referential integrity type list yet. Let's take a look at the code tab. Here we see the code in our plus PDC template, which was copied from the original built-in Parent Delete Cascade. A lot of commenting here. Irwin built-in trigger, parent, percent, verb phrase, %child. Well, we know about those. Those are Irwin macro commands, aren't they? On Parent Delete Cascade, of course, that's the rule. Irwin relation info, delete %child, from %child, deleted, where, and then our join clause. But before we do the join clause, we have some macros strung together to write a comment. And the good news is these trigger templates are heavily commented. And the bad news is these trigger templates are heavily commented. So certainly in our customized versions of them, we might consider getting the conversation kind of quieted a little bit by leaving out some of these comments. And that's all I'm going to do here is just delete this comment line. Oop. We'll take a look and see how this expands in just a little bit. Users of Irwin Data Modeler often comment, well, these trigger templates are just plain vanilla. And of course, that's the purpose of a template. It is just plain vanilla, but it's a template. You can edit it. You can make it do whatever you want this particular Parent Delete Cascade trigger to do, in addition to the very basic Parent Delete Cascade stuff. Okay, now we want to go to our Referential Integrity Type tab. Right now, this plus PDC template is not connected to any referential integrity option in our model. Notice two-column list, on the left referential integrity type, and on the right the attached trigger template. And in the beginning, by default, they're all matched up one-on-one. I'm going to scroll down to the RI type Parent Delete Cascade, and notice on the right now, we have the original Parent Delete Cascade attached as the template. So wherever in the model we're asking for the RI type of Parent Delete Cascade, the code for that trigger will be generated by the original Parent Delete Cascade trigger template. But drop down that list. That's quite a list. A nice thing about the plus sign in my customized trigger templates is that the plus sign causes it to pop up to the top. So I'll find all my pluses up there at the top of the list. So now we have attached my customized Parent Delete Cascade trigger template to the RI type Parent Delete Cascade. Wherever in the model I'm asking for a Parent Delete Cascade, generally going to be in supertype subtype arrangements, by the way. It's a very dangerous referential integrity action. But wherever it's called for in the model, the code in the DDL will be generated by my plus PDC trigger template. Is that cool? I'm going to close the RI trigger template editor right now. And we're going to take a look at the other trigger item from the model menu, triggers. These triggers are just table triggers. They may have reference integrity purposes, but may not. A trigger is just precompiled code, part of the database, and it gets run whenever certain things happen. We have no table triggers right now. Take a look at the General tab. These are triggers from scratch. Apply a tree here. Let's create a new trigger template up at the top. Just trigger 1030. And this will activate things in our editor so that we can collapse and expand the trees and see what's going on. Let's look at this tree. Workload group, event group. These things are very specific to SQL Server. And if you're working in Oracle, they'd be very specific to Oracle, and so forth. Just for explanatory purposes, way at the top, let's check the box Create Database. At the top of the editor where we've created our new trigger, notice we have a name, and then we have trigger timing, after or for, or unspecified. Log on event, and whether or not we want this code to be generated at schema generation time. Once again, where you see this generate box, and you see it in many editors in Irwin Data Modeler, if you uncheck it, then that item remains in your model, but it's not active. It's not going to generate any code until you come back and turn it on with the generate box. On the code tab, let's set the code type to SQL, and we have at the bottom our SQL. In the SQL editor, we have a couple of useful buttons. Cut, copy, paste. We also have access to the macro toolbox. Remember this from earlier work. And we have access to an editor, which just zooms in this box a little bit, gives us more room and more functionality. Save, print, find and find again, spell check, so forth. And this is our code for create trigger something, the name of the procedure. Take a look on the expanded tab now to the right of code and open the editor for this. And now we see all of the macro commands that are in that trigger template code. We see them expanded. Remember, it was an after trigger, and it's associated with create database. Tells us how it's going to name it. It doesn't do anything except it's empty. Well, of course, we want it to do something, we're going to have to change the code. But something like this is what you'll see in the generated schema if we choose the right generation options. So we have to have the template code. We have to have it generatable, as we saw out here with the generate checkbox. And at schema generation time, we have to check the option that says, hey, generate this kind of trigger. So you have to choose the right generation options. Let's cancel and cancel. So that is Irwin Data Modeler support for triggers, RI triggers, and just generic table triggers. As you explore further, will you become the Irwin Data Modeler trigger expert in your organization? Many years ago, I knew a consultant who bought a copy of the tool just to help him learn how to write triggers. The built-in trigger templates allowed him to focus on customizing. Irwin Data Modeler uses templates to translate the model into a script. It's done that for a long time, but recently the templates have been exposed. They're open to you. These FE templates, forward engineering templates, are customizable. We can actually modify the way Irwin Data Modeler generates schema. This gives us support for entire systems that Irwin Data Modeler doesn't yet support. In fact, if you check the Irwin online community, you'll find modification of forward engineering templates to support Hadoop hives before Irwin supported them directly. Another thing we can do by modifying or customizing the forward engineering templates is to create support for DBMS features that Irwin Data Modeler doesn't yet support. It may support that version of the DBMS, but not a particular feature. So let's create support for features not yet supported. Actually, I have a historical example of that. Prior to Irwin release 9.7, Irwin Data Modeler did not support temporal tables in Teradata. We can accomplish that, however, by inserting a little bit into the script that's used for creating the schema under Create Table. So we have a model loaded up here, somewhat familiar to you. Down at the bottom right, we can see this is targeted to Teradata 14.10. Actions. forward engineer, forward engineering templates. And we get a little warning. It's not a warning, it's just informational about validating for conformity, and we'll just click OK. Here we have the template editor that's used to edit interactively forward engineering templates. Let's see what all we have here. It is an interactive environment, so very nice. Top left corner, we have templates, and if we collapse this top branch a bit, you see they're categorized. You can create brand new templates with the new button up in the toolbar. That would allow you, for example, to create templates from code that you're trying to build support for a database management system that Irwin does not yet support, or features. Within the Create Templates folder, let's pick Create Entity. That's the template we're going to be working with. At the top right, Template Source shows us the source code for this template. You'll notice, if we had to do this the regular way, this would not be for the faint-hearted. Over 775 lines of code in this script. Below the template source, we see the expanded text. And later we're going to see how to make that work for us. It will take the script above, the template above, and expand that for a particular section of a particular model, maybe a particular table. There's some more we have to know to be able to use that, so we'll cover that as we go through the example. The bottom right corner, macros that you can use in these templates. There are many, 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 many of them. This is not all of them. We'll see how to control those in a little bit. There's a toolbar up at the top. It's got a lot of buttons on it, lots of detail. There's special help all the way to the right. Third button from the right, toggle macro categories. That applies to the window at the bottom left corner of this IDE, and it switches over to a tree. And in fact, we do want the forward engineering macros, so we'll flip that back. But there are many, many macros that you can access for use in building your forward engineering templates. Let's see, what else do we want to cover here? Oh, edit macro categories. That's interesting. That's the second button from the right. We're looking at the forward engineering macros, and you've seen these other categories. You can actually create new categories. So you might want to create a category and name it something like My Frequently Used Macros, but that's a pretty long name. It also lets you assign macros to different categories or multiple categories. If you want to be looking and accessing certain macros in several different categories, you can set that up. The button third from the right, Configure, lets you change the appearance of the interactive development environment. You can select the items and change how they appear, foreground, background colors, and so forth. Select macro categories to hide, and a couple of boxes to check over here on the right. Always hide deprecated macros, always hide discouraged macros. We won't make any changes here, just cancel out of that. Okay, up here in our template source, again in the top left under templates, select Create Entity. This is our Create Entity template, and we're going to be making a modification here. I want to modify the Create Table. Well, with all this code here, it's going to be a challenge to find Create Table. So be glad we have a search button here. Actually, in this script, Create and Table don't appear as two words. Let me look for Table. There we go. Create. We're going to find Create Table, actually divided between lines 29 and 35. So that all occurs in this chunk. That's what we're going to modify. We have a little snippet of code that we want to add after the word table. So I already have that on my clipboard. Let me jump in here following table, the word table, and paste in this line of additional information. Notice the expanded text still doesn't show what we want to see. We need to go back up just below the toolbar. Notice Sample Context. This is where we select what we want to see in the expanded text. So what we want to see the expanded text for, actually. If you drop down that list, you'll see many, many items listed here already. And in fact, there's our publisher entity. That's the one we want. But if you'd like to see everything in the model, there's a box labeled Show All. You can check that box on, and then you'll find, wow, on and on and on, everything in the model. Publisher entity. There we go. Being evaluated now. Create table with, and here you see that little bit of code that we pasted in up above, along with all the templates surrounding it. So I'm expecting now, at schema generation time, that instead of just create table PUBLR, I will have this create table with, clustered, and so on and so forth, just as we see here in the expanded text. But this is the interactive development environment, right? It's not the schema generator. That's right. So let's save this to a new name so we don't get it confused. Instead of teradata.fet, I'm going to save it to new teradata.fet. And let me close the template editor. Now under Actions, Forward Engineer, Schema. This is quite familiar to us. Below the selection of options, categories on the left and details on the right, we have a choice of database template. Right now, the default template, teradata.fet, is showing. Push the Browse button. It takes us to the correct folder. There's our new teradata.fet. Open. Let's use the filter button at the bottom left. I'm going to put all these back and just bring over Publisher. So the only table, filter to include, the only table I want to see is the table Publisher. And we use the preview button for this. There we go, create table with, and our fancy syntax here. And you can save this off, send it to your local Teradata DBA and say, will this work? That's the ultimate test, right? Get it approved. And close. Now I don't want to leave this template set up for my Teradata models. I want to restore the original template to use here. Browsing doesn't work for it. This is kind of confusing, and I want to get you kind of forewarned. Let me use the browser. I'll go back to teradata.fet and open. And I get a warning that says, oh, but that's the template file whose name already matches the default template. Well, I know that. That's why I want it. Reset. Near the bottom right corner, push the reset button, and reset restores the default forward engineering template. So we've now seen how our little change to the way tables are created in Teradata 14.10, and we've seen that in the interactive development environment. If you're already in the schema generator, there's a quick way into the interactive development environment for the templates, and that's just the edit button down here beside the reset we just pushed. And that notification again, okay, here we are. Close and okay, and a little note about changing the default. Very good, amazing stuff. This ability to customize Irwin Data Modeler's forward engineering templates is one of the least understood and least explored capabilities of this terrific tool, in my opinion. Admittedly, you need to be a bit more of a programmer than I am, but I hope we've taken some of the mystery out of the FETs. Reverse engineering. Earlier in this course, when we created a schema from a model, we learned about forward engineering. This is often called model-based system development. Now we're going to see how to create a data model from a schema going the other way. Reverse engineering is a mandatory step in integrating systems or migrating systems. RE can also be an enormous help in building understanding of vendor systems or other acquired systems. RE gives you a chance to put to use many of the techniques that we've covered in these tool training courses, especially subject areas, diagrams, themes, and styles. Well, let's reverse engineer something then. We can reverse engineer using Irwin Data Modeler from a DDL script or directly from a connection to a system catalog. We'll start with a system catalog. Here we see my venerable SQL Server 8 Management Studio and some tables in a database called course. Auth, book, book auth. These look somewhat familiar to us. This is the book subject area of our publishing model that we've been working with. This is what we're going to reverse engineer today. Over to Irwin Data Modeler. From the Actions menu, select Reverse Engineer. We're going to choose a model type of logical physical. The database is SQL Server 2008, and push the Next button. Lots of options. First of all, we can reverse engineer from a database or from a script file. If we're going to choose script file, if the script already exists, we could just push that button and then browse through our storage system and find the script that we want to reverse engineer. But we're going to maximize our fun this time and do it directly from the database. Another one of these option trees, and once again, it goes on, and this is a good thing. These are all the different objects that we can reverse engineer with Irwin Data Modeler. Of course, you might be dealing with a new system and perhaps a big system, and we don't know much about it. It's been acquired somehow, or a vendor system. So for the first run, you might want to make an option set here that just gets the very basic stuff, the basic properties of tables and columns and so forth. And as we've seen with other option sets in other places in Irwin Data Modeler, we can save the option set. My favorite option then is to save as an XML file. That way you can easily reuse this option set exactly as before. Also, you can share the option set with colleagues. And you'll see this capability throughout Irwin Data Modeler. Imagine a value of a library full of option sets already tested, already used, already approved. Options on the right side of this dialog are not saved as part of the option set. Up in the top right corner, we have some options really pertaining to a database, how we want the process to proceed. And then there's some mystery here in the middle of the right side of the dialog. Infer primary keys, relations. If the source does not have complete primary keys or foreign keys, and that's what Irwin DM is referring to here with the word relations as foreign key constraints. But if these don't exist explicitly in the database or in the script, Irwin can use some rules and an inference engine to estimate, if you will, what the primary keys and relations, foreign key constraints, would be if they were explicit. And of course, this is extremely handy information to have in a data model. For inferring relations, we check that box. You have your choice to infer them from indexes and the membership in the indexes, which columns belong to which indexes, or to infer emphasizing column names. Actually, some rules from both indexes and column names are used in both options, but your choice here determines which rules are emphasized. For fun, I'm going to check these two boxes. We'll see how Irwin treats that. If you're going to infer primary keys and relations in a system that you're not familiar with, it might already have explicit primary keys and foreign key constraints. Irwin will warn you about this. So if you choose to infer primary keys and or relations in a system that has some explicit primary keys and some explicit foreign key constraints, it's possible that you'll get some redundancies. So just be aware of that. This is inference after all. Irwin's trying its best to help you out. This system, by the way, does already have explicit primary keys and foreign key constraints. We just want to see how it behaves. Options at the bottom right corner, case conversion of physical names and case conversion of logical names. I'm going to pick the option for mixed case conversion of logical names. What this does is give us column names in lowercase, but with the initial character in uppercase. It also replaces underscore characters in the column names with spaces in the attribute names on the logical side. Ready for the next button at the bottom right corner. Irwin DM asks us to connect to our database. Here's our database course. Connect. Now it tells us, hey, I'm trying to infer these primary keys, but it already contains primary keys. Do you really want me to try to infer them for tables that don't already have them? Well, I'm just going to say no. But if I said yes, then if the keys are explicit in a table, that's fine. It'll skip over that and go on to tables that do not have explicit primary keys. Still, because of the way columns are named, we can wind up with some confusion in the inference rules. So again, just be aware that you may, on occasion, get redundancies. I'm going to ask Irwin not to infer. And now we get a similar warning for relations or foreign key constraints. Once again, I'm going to ask Irwin Data Modeler not to attempt. And here we are. It's a wonderful thing, almost too simple. This is the physical side of our diagram. underscore characters, and so forth. We see a couple of views. There's v author privacy, v publisher. Let's go take a look at the logical side of the diagram. And here you see, well, of course we do have mixed case, but the underscore characters are gone. They're all replaced with spaces. And it's just that easy. Now let's see how this reverse engineering works against a script. I have a script test.ers. ERS is one of the 3 extensions that Irwin understands for DDL scripts, and I'd like to use this one for scripts that were generated by Irwin. Let's take a look at it. That's it. We see our tables at the top and then some views. Bunch of options. Some stored procedures, all kinds of stuff going on in this script. So that's kind of fun. All right, let's reverse engineer this. Actions, reverse engineer. Logical physical again, and next. This time we're going to reverse engineer from a script file, so we push the script file button at the top left and browse our way to test.ers. Open. Once again, the only change I'm going to make to the options is at the bottom right corner. I'll select mixed case conversion of logical names and next. Here we are. Our physical and logical sides. And we picked up some fancy stuff like functions. Some of the things that we saw out in that script. Didn't want to dwell on the script itself too much. Wanted to dwell primarily on reverse engineering. So there you have it. We've reverse engineered from a database, right, connecting to the system catalog in SQL Server, and from a DDL script. Now you should be ready to explore this further on your own. We're not quite finished with reverse engineering. We've worked with model templates before in Irwin DM tool training. Let's begin with a quick refresher. In our earlier work with model templates, we built a template with some reusable content, no entities or tables. Here's that template. Notice the title bar. MySQL Server template .irwin_tmpl. So we can open the template itself in Irwin DM. Now in real life, we would have many default values, but we have the ones here that we created in our template earlier in Irwin tool training. And in real life, we'd have 30 or 50 or more domains. Well, our template's not that rich, but we do have some user-defined domain. We might have a more complete set of ER diagrams in a real-life template, but here we have created a couple, one named logical, one named physical. The template includes the naming standards that we built, our glossary, publications. It includes the default theme and the classic theme, but also the themes that we built, endpoint and starting point. Finally, a couple of validation rules, area codes and state codes. We said that these were the basic components we want in all of our new models. We could just throw out the reverse engineering that we've done and do it again. This time we would include the template. Well, that's what we're going to do, of course, because it gives us another chance to work with reverse engineering. Let's take a look at the model that we did reverse engineer. And if you notice in the Model Explorer, well, we've got some default value that popped up during our reverse engineering effort. Must have been in a database. We don't have any custom user-defined domains. We have just the classic theme and the default theme, no themes from our custom template, and no validation rules. Okay, well, let's put this model away. Didn't make any changes, so we're not going to save anything. This time we're going to reverse engineer from a script, so let's take a look at that script. This script was generated directly from SQL Server. Okay, I think I'll even close just to make sure there's nothing up my sleeve. Let me close the model template. Now, as before, actions, reverse engineer. We'll choose logical physical, SQL Server 2008. However, notice we have a choice under target server to match template target server. Let's do that. and drop down our template list. Notice after we check that box, Match Template Target Server, our default template disappears. So here we go, MySQL Server Template.Irwin_TMPL. That's the one we were just looking at. There's a Browse Files, there's a Browse Mart. Let's also select Preserve the Template Binding. This will allow the model to sync with the latest version of the template whenever we open the model. And we want to be able to take advantage of that with the models that already have that template bound to them. And push the Next button. This time at the top left corner, we're going to pick Reverse Engineer from Script File. And let's browse our way to that script file. There's our test ERS. And open. The only change we're going to make in the options is, again, mixed case conversion of logical names. That's clear down at the bottom right. And we're going to use the default option set for databases. Click the Next button near the bottom right. Ta-da! There it is. Thing of beauty, huh? Wait a minute. No entities or tables? Let me switch back to the logical view, just because it shortens up our Model Explorer. Let's examine default values. Oh, well, there are area codes and state code. Do we have the user-defined domains from our template? Yes, we do indeed. How about ER diagrams? Well, no, just this one. Got our naming standard, though. Themes, validation rules. We didn't get our ER diagrams. Well, notice way up at the top here, we're looking at the test subject area. Let me switch over to model. Aha! Physical tab and logical tab. So we're looking at the template. One thing that we did not delve into, we didn't know which subject area those diagrams in a template were associated with. And it turns out it's the model. So we've got our ER diagrams, logical and physical, naming standard, themes, validation rules. It's a beautiful thing. But no entities, no tables. Is that really true? Let's take a look at the Model Explorer. There's our entities. Author, book, book author, the association entity, book year-to-date sales, publisher. But they're not showing here. Of course not. The template can't know for a future reverse engineering effort which entities are going to be included in which diagrams. So we'll just have to put them in here. And we can do that by selecting the logical diagram first and changing the properties. On the Members tab, here's our list of availables and our list of includeds on the right. In the included list, let's check the box Automatically Populate from Model. Boop. And close. Oh, yes, it didn't automatically lay them out. No, this is reverse engineered. It has no idea how we want them laid out. Well, earlier we did hierarchical. We've worked with that before. So let's try the hierarchical layout and maybe zoom to fit. Well, that just populated this diagram. We're going to have to do the physical diagram also. Right-click on the background. On the Members tab, let's check the box to automatically populate from model. Ba-dum-bump. We got the tables. We've got the views. And you can see in the overview panel way at the bottom right, we've got a layout mess. But thanks to our friendly layout gadgets, we're in good shape. Back to the logical tab. Remember our starting point and ending point themes? We could apply those to start with publisher entity as a starting point. Book year-to-date sales as an endpoint. Book author as an endpoint. This is a wonderful thing. The logical tab now and the physical diagram both populated and both automatically laid out. You always have to do some cleanup of the relationship lines. You might try automatically laying them out just by selecting everything in the diagram. And then in the layout buttons, push that little motorcycle button. And that usually clears up the lines a little better than trying to do everything at one time. So again, a real template would probably have lots of reusable content, maybe several dozen domains. You may keep a set of standard pre-approved templates. We can apply them through reverse engineering as we've just done now. Or if we're building a new model, entity by entity, table by table, we can start a brand new model from scratch with that template assigned and just save many hours of drudgery, especially when we're starting with a new model, maybe the system we don't have a complete understanding of. So imagine a real model with dozens or even hundreds of entities, tables, and the opportunity for dozens of domains, dozens of default values, dozens of validation constraints. It's a wonderful thing. This module should have demystified reverse engineering with Irwin Data Modeler for you. Complete Compare is Irwin Data Modeler's wizard-driven synchronization capability. I don't think it's particularly difficult to use or to learn how to use, but I think it is difficult to learn on your own. There are a couple items that it's easy to miss on your own. By illuminating those, I hope you'll soon join the ranks of Complete Compare fans. It really is a phenomenal capability. Irwin Data Modeler has the capability to synchronize pretty much anything Irwin with pretty much anything else Irwin. We're going to explore this capability, which is known as Complete Compare. The model we're looking at is our familiar publications model, and we're going to compare it to a smaller model, which I've called Simple Author. It has a few of our author attributes and a few of the book attributes, and it differs from our publications model in ways that we'll see. For right now, to make an emphasis of this, I'm going to put this model away. That model does not have to be open. And now from the window menu, you see the only model I have open is my model that I'm working on, my primary model, and it's named Publications. From the Actions menu, I'll select Complete Compare. We're familiar with this wizard, or at least wizards of this shape. Let's take a peek. The overview link tells us what the wizard is about. Once again, you have a choice of navigating by these links on the left or clicking the next button and the back button down at the bottom, about in the middle. Notice the links down the left. The first one of interest to us is the left model link. And you'll notice there's also a right model link. Well, what does this mean, left and right? Once we're through with this dialogue and we're looking at the results of Complete Compare, we're going to see details about one model on the left and details about the other model on the right. So, left model, right model. Which one do you want to appear on the left? That's all this is about. We only have one model open. Notice the list here in the wizard says Open Models, and that model is named Publications. In the Location column, we also see the file name and, in fact, the full path to that Publications model. Remember, the file name does not have to match the model name. This is just one minor case in which those two names being different are very helpful. So we only have one model to choose. Therefore, Irwin DM has chosen it, has selected it as our left model. Let's click on right model. We only have one open. So let's look up at the top of this dialog and see some action we can take. Oh, way up at the top on the left, you will find up here some text as we go through the wizard, which directs you, guides you. Select the right model. Please select the model for the right side of Complete Compare. We're going to load this model from a file. Now, that could be a DDL script, or it could be an Irwin model, or could be other things, which we'll see. Our other choices are database or, again, DDL script, or loading a model from Mart. We're going to load our right model from a file. Push the load button near the top right. And before we go further, notice at the bottom right corner, drop down list of file types. In addition to .irwin model types, you also see Irwin DM templates, SQL DDL, and XML files. We can save our Irwin models as XML files. And that's exceedingly handy sometimes. We want this file right here, and open it. Now we have a left model and a right model, and in fact, both models are open. Here's this little miniature author model that we looked at briefly before we put it away. Bring the wizard back up. Now we have a left model and a right model. Notice the icons on the left. There's an icon beside Publications and an icon beside Simple Author. These two icons are meant to indicate these are both Irwin DM models. You'll see a different icon for a database, different icon for a script, and so forth. Next link, type selection. This is where we select the types of objects we want to compare. Notice the text at the top, Complete Compare Type Selection. Also text at the top right, Compare Level. logical and physical. What does that mean? And here we see the checkboxes above the list, above the tree. Compare level, logical level, physical level, or database level. Well, these checkboxes determine the contents of the tree that you see below, and this tree is gigantic. Logical level means I want to have access to everything that I would expect to find in a logical Irwin DM model, fonts and colors and all that stuff. Physical level, well, that means I want to have available here in my option tree options that I would expect to find, types of objects that I would expect to find on the physical side of an Irwin DM model. Database level, if I were to check that box, and if I check that box, it's the only one that can be checked. I can check logical and physical both, but database level is exclusive, and that would limit my option set to just the kinds of things that I'd find in a database. No fonts, no colors, none of that sort of thing. No model kinds of stuff, just database kinds of stuff. Okay, option set. We have two to choose from. The standard default option set, which is the one we see here. Most of these checkboxes are grayed out. In other words, some of the properties have been selected, but not nearly all of them. That's just the list of the properties we can choose for the model. These are model level properties. Another option set we have available just on installing Irwin DM is the advanced default option set. That pretty much pre-selects everything. We're going to leave it at standard default option set. Once again, we have the ability to open up an option set that had previously been stored, or to make changes to an existing option set and to save them, or to save our current selections as a whole new option set. Once again, this is a case of option sets being savable and reusable. In fact, while we're on the subject, notice the buttons at the bottom left. Load session. Save session. What does that mean? If I save session, notice I get a file extension of CCS. That stands for Complete Compare Session. Well, that must be more than an option set. Yes, it is. And in fact, we're going to see some more choices that we have to make later on. But all of the choices that we can make here, including left model, right model, our type selection, our left object and right object selections, and our advanced options, all of those are combined in a complete compare session. I can save the entire session, and then I can load and rerun the entire session. You wonder, why would I want to do that? I was on an engagement at one of the giant mutual fund companies, happened to be discussing with one of their folks. So every Thursday morning, he was going through these options. This tree is enormous. And checking every single option, making sure exactly the same boxes were checked. Could he guarantee that the same boxes were checked? Well, only as good as his eyesight and proofreading capability were. So I showed him these two little buttons, save session and load session. But this enabled him now to set up his very own option set for doing exactly what he had to do. The left model was always the test schema, the right model was always the production schema, and the other selections that we'll see on left object and right object selection links here in a moment, all of that stuff was saved as part of the session. So now, this saves him several hours every week. Just those two buttons. Okay, so the type selection is all about the types of objects we want compared. Take a look now at left object selection. Remember, this means the objects from the left model. Two lists, actually two little trees on the left, choose objects using sets. And we can check that or uncheck it if we want. I like it checked. Subject areas. Well, it knows what model we want on the left, so it knows what subject areas that model has. I've decided I want to include all of them, but I don't have to. I've decided I want to include all the indexes, but I don't have to. Triggers, schemas, and so forth. On the right, we see the end result of all of these choices we've been making, all these trees we've been filling out, the model we put on the left, model we put on the right. For example, here are the entities and tables in our left model. Let me expand this a little bit so we can see better. What if I decided that I did not want to include the book subject area? Let me clear that checkbox on the left. Well, by clearing the book subject area, that says don't include what's in the book subject area, but it didn't turn off any of these checkboxes on the right. Why not? Well, because our model checkbox is still checked. So all of the objects that are in the book subject area are also by default in the model subject area, and that's why they're over here. Let's recheck the book subject area and clear model. Open up entities and tables again, and we see pretty much, we see all of them checked because all of the entities and tables are in at least one of these subject areas. Now let me clear the book subject area. Aha, author is gone, the book is not checked anymore. Book year-to-date sales, publisher is cleared. But I want to compare everything. So I wanted you to see how that works. That can be confusing because model, the ultimate everything subject area, controls the others. Indexes, triggers, schemas, owners, and so forth. On the right object selection list, we see the same kind of thing, except this is for the model that we're going to have on the right. This is that little tiny model, the one that is now on top in IrwinDM underneath us here. Finally, the bottom link on the left is named or labeled Advanced Options. I don't know what's advanced about them, but I think they're more miscellaneous or other. The checkbox at the top says, hey, when you're done, if you've had to reverse engineer a model out of a script or a database in order to run Complete Compare, and that's a hint how Complete Compare works, it turns everything into an IrwinDM model first. But if I don't want to save that model after Complete Compare, this checkbox says, well, throw it away. All set? That's a lot of options. Please remember, save session and load session. Yeah, we can't see that. Let me move that over here make it a little more clear. I'm ready to push the compare button. Ta-da! And this is the famous dialogue, some call it a report, named Resolve Differences. And it's all reshapeable and sizable. We scroll up and down at the top here. That's a lot. Well, what do we have here? We have a tree that's helping us navigate all the way on the left. We have two models. The model on the left is our left model, publications, and the model on the right, simple author, is the one we selected to be our right model. In the next demonstration, we'll cover how to navigate through resolve differences. After learning to navigate the Complete Compare wizard, our next challenge is to navigate the results dialog. I want to emphasize a specific sequence. There's no magic step 1, step 2, but it helps if you go about this systematically. Well, this is surely overwhelming. The resolve differences dialog, sometimes called a report, just goes on and on and on and on. Fortunately, there is a wonderful collapse and expand behavior that we can access here. Of course, the minus boxes, which could be plus boxes to the left of each branch, gives us control over expanding and collapsing that branch. Let's go all the way up to the top, to the model branch, and collapse it, then expand it. Aha! Now we're going to have access to it one step at a time, one branch at a time. Now as we expand, for example, the tables branch, we see I have control one branch at a time over expansion and collapse, and that's terrific. Let's examine some of these buttons up here at the top left. In the fourth row of button bars, we have what looks like a bunch of equal signs. These are filter buttons, and as I mentioned elsewhere in the tool training, IrwinDM almost always means filter to include. More than one of these filter buttons can be active at one time. According to the tooltips, left to right, they are show equal items. This shows objects or properties that are the same between the left model and the right model. Next, show resolved items. As we work through the report and we make choices how to deal with individual differences between the left model and the right model, those changes are recorded in alter scripts. If this button is selected, those items will still show here, but they'll be grayed out. Without this button, those differences are temporarily hidden from us. Some people find that disconcerting. Show not equal items. If the item from the left model and the corresponding item from the right model are different, they will be displayed if this button is pushed. Then we have two similar looking buttons. One is, the first one on the left says, show unaligned objects on the right. This means if there's an object that exists in the right model, but not in the left, you see the equal sign is on the right and a question mark is on the left. If an object exists in the right model, but not on the left, then the left model will show us this crosshatch pattern. And the rightmost filter key, show unaligned objects on the left. Here it has the equal sign on the left, but a question mark on the right. This is just the reverse of the previous button. If there's an object in the left model that doesn't exist in the right, Then on the right model, we'll see a crosshatch pattern. We have some examples. Auth exists both in the left model and the right model, as does book and book auth. But back order does not. And in fact, book return all the way down to store name, they don't exist in the right model either. So there's a lot of this crosshatching pattern. It fills up a good part of the screen. Let's get rid of that by turning off one of the filter to include buttons. Which one would that be? Well, the objects exist on the left, but not on the right, and we don't want to show them, so we have to turn the filter off. That's the rightmost button. And now you see the filter button's no longer highlighted, it's no longer depressed, and all that cross-hatching is gone. We don't intend to be adding any new entities or tables to the right model, so we haven't lost anything yet. This Resolve Differences report shows a lot of detailed information. Under Tables, select the row for the entity table that's named Auth in both the left and the right models. Now down at the bottom of the dialog, let's pull up that bottom pane, the panel that's labeled Property View. I see that attribute order, not the same. It has a little not equal sign beside the left model. Column order and database column order aren't the same either. Well, let's start with attribute order and expand it. Oh, well, no wonder the order is different. The left model has a contract attribute that the right model doesn't even have. So naturally, the order will be different. And I suspect we'd find the same thing down in column order and database order. Well, let's collapse the property view just to clean up our field of vision. And go back to the object view pane at the top. Expand the branch for auth, and then expand the branch for columns. Aha! 2 attribute columns are listed because those are the 2 that meet our filter conditions. Unaligned objects on the right that don't exist on the left, and objects that aren't equal. Well, auth ident on the left and auth ID, they don't even have the same name. Let's take a look at the property view down at the bottom again, and let's see what all is different between these 2 columns in the left model and the right model. The name is different, meaning the attribute name. And the physical name, those 2 are different, left model, right model. And notice beside the physical name, auth ident and auth ID, it says they're calculated. What's that mean? Well, that's intended to show that whatever the value, whatever the property value you're looking at here, was arrived at by means of some rule. So there's a naming rule in the model that constructs these column names. Yes, indeed, we've seen that. Take a look at the other attribute column, auth zip code versus, on the right model, auth postal code. Those are different in name, as we see in the property view panel at the bottom. So Urban Data Modeler is pretty smart. Because the other attribute properties match, Complete Compare has determined that auth ident and auth ID, auth zip code, and auth postal code are meant to be the same. They're on the same line. So they're aligned with each other. It's just that the attribute has 2 different names in the 2 different models. Wait a minute. Remember the first time we looked in property view, we saw that there was a different column order? And the reason for that was that one of the models had a column that the other model does not have. The left model had a column that the right model didn't have, but now it's not showing. Up at the entity table level, it still shows. There's author contract, attribute named contract in the left model, but not in the right model. Well, why can we see it here, but it's not displayed on the screen? What controls the things that are displayed on the screen? The filter buttons, and we turned the filter button off. Let's turn that right button, show unaligned objects on the left. Let's turn that back on. There we go. Now we see, well, we see a lot of things, but for the entity table named auth, we do now see that the left model has a column named CONT. The right model doesn't have a corresponding column at all. So the filters are click or push to include. While we have this column selected, take a look at that property view to see properties of the column. In our next demo, we'll see how we can take action with this report. That will introduce us to a few more of these buttons at the top left corner. I'll see you there. So we have our Resolve Differences report. We've learned how to move around in it, how to control the level of detail, exposing only the detail that we need at the moment by collapsing and expanding branches of the tree, by using the filter buttons. Of course, now the question is, how do we actually do something with this Complete Compare? This will be our final demo for Complete Compare. This time, we're going to look at how to make changes to one or both of the Irwin Data Modeler things that we're comparing. In this case, we're comparing 2 models. We'll work with more of the toolbars and with more of the controls down in the object view and the property view panels. Also, we've added some items to our type selection tree I'll let you see if you can catch them as we go forward. Also, I've made a few more changes to the simple author model. We definitely want to look at data types. So let's fire up Actions, Complete Compare. I have both the publications model and the simple author model open in Irwin. They're already selected for us as left and right model, and it's fine. We'll use them as they are. Publications, the left model, and simple author, the right model. Remember the type selection tree? Want to make sure we're comparing logical and physical levels both. Right now, it's set to database level. And if you take a look, just scroll through the tree, you'll notice you don't see fonts and colors and all the things that you're used to seeing in an Irwin data model. These are the things that you can find in a database. I'm going to select the physical level now, and notice database level gets automatically unchecked. Then also check logical level. This is our largest tree, the combined option trees for physical level and logical level. Again, those levels referring specifically to objects that you'll find in a database and objects that you'll find on the logical side of an Irwin data model and on the physical side of an Irwin data model. We're not going to change anything in our left model object selections, nor in the right model object selections. I'm just bringing them up so you can take another look at them. In fact, let's just go push the compare button, click. Yes, it's more common to see a resolve differences report like this, with lots and lots of rows, lots of information. The resolve differences report is a bit daunting. Imagine if the two things we're comparing here each had thousands of objects. In that case, you'd want to divide and conquer. One approach for a big job is to begin with a bare minimum of types that we're going to compare. Begin with just entities and tables, attributes and columns. Another opportunity is to restrict your concerns to one subject area at a time. And you can set that up in left object selection and right object selection. So we can go through our report here, make the changes to the left side and the right side that we want to make, and then push the Finish button at the bottom right. Check those changes, commit what we want, and close out, but not before we save our session. Remember the ability to save and then reload the complete compare session. So tomorrow, you come back, you load the session that you saved today, and pick up right where you left off. Okay, well, all the way up at the top on the model line for the object view panel, collapse and re-expand. It's nice to be able to get a handle on the whole thing at one time, so you might want to run a report. In fact, reporting might be part of your work process. In the top toolbar row, all the way at the right end, is a little Help button, just for Complete Compare, and to the left of that, the Show Report button. I'm going to click that. I'd like to see this as an Excel workbook. Notice that all of the differences on the left model are shown in the left value column, and they're colored red. All of the differences in the right model are shown in the right value column, and they're highlighted in blue. The information that's in this report in black is just that. It's information, but it's not model content. Okay, well, let's see what we have. Let's go all the way down here to line 1324. Yes, small models, but there's a lot of information in an Irwin data model. Back now to the Resolve Differences dialog or report. Let's expand the domains section. The first domain that we see, a disagreement, not equals. See that little sign to the left of the left model column? Equal sign with a slash mark. Remember, those are all set in the filters row. The default domain is different between the left model and the right model. Well, different how? We check in the property view pane below. We see that the logical data type for the model on the left is a character field with a width of 0, and on the right, character field with a width of 18. Similar data types on the physical side. Well, that's interesting. Using a character field with a width of 0 for the default domain is a useful trick. It flags any attributes or columns that are still associated with the default domain. And this indicates either an oversight or a shortcoming in the modeling process. So what do we do with it when we find it here? Well, I would suggest really, truly, probably just going back and examining each of those columns one at a time to make sure that the data type that we're selecting should not be char 18. And of course, the domain should not be default. Just for fun, to see how it works here in Complete Compare Resolve Differences, I'm going to select the domain default up in the object view pane. And notice in between the left model and the right model columns, we have actually two little columns with a button in each column. There's an arrow that points to the left and an arrow that points to the right. So if we'd like to push the thing or the setting that's on the left over to the right, we push the button that points to the right, and vice versa. If we want to push the setting that's shown on the right over to the left model, we push the arrow that points to the left. There are two other arrows all the way up at the top row of toolbars. Copy items to the left, copy items to the right. And these are all of the items that you have selected, because you can select more than one thing at a time with Control-click, but one line at a time, right there on the line of the report. Just for fun, let's push the arrow that points to the right. That domain is gone. The default domain no longer appears on our report. That's disconcerting to a lot of people, especially to new users of Complete Compare. So up here in the Filter Buttons row, the one with all the equal signs in it, click on the button second from the left. That's equal sign with a check mark, and that will show all the differences that we have resolved. It's going to leave them highlighted in this tan color. If we decide, no, I don't really want to do that, I want to just make a note of this and go back and change all of these after I examine the model. Got an undo button up in the top row of buttons. Well, that's good for our work with domains. A little introduction. Let's close the domains part of our tree and open up tables. In the author table, let's expand that part of our tree and expand columns and look specifically at the author address column. We see the two models for this column differ. They're not equal. We look at the property view to see how they differ. Well, we have some different comments. For the first line, which is the comment, meaning the physical side, notice in the right model, simple author, we see the word calculated. And that means, once again, that whatever is showing here is the result of some rule that we have either entered or that is fundamental to Irwin Data Modeler. We see the same calculated in the left model. Definition. Well, the right model doesn't have a definition. The left model does have a definition, and now we see what that calculated for the physical side comment means. Do you remember? Yeah, we had a rule that says initially enter for the comment on the physical side whatever the modeler has typed as a definition on the logical side. Domain parent is different. Well, that's because the right model, which was reverse engineered, doesn't have any domains, and the left model does have a domain, specifically called street address. We're not interested in making any changes to the right model because we're not going to be preserving it as a model going forward. We see the two names are different. The left model name is author address. The right model name is abbreviated. Well, wait a minute. Up here at the top, it says, in the object view, auth ADRS. When we reverse engineer the right model, the logical side, since we didn't cause this to be different in any way, the logical side names are the same as the physical side names. Okay, let's check author city. So, bar chart 20 for our attribute column physical data type in the left model, bar chart 25 in the right model. Let's make our left model like the right model. Push the left pointing arrow. Uh-oh, nothing happened. Well, way down in the status bar, this is the first time we've ever looked at the details field. And it's about time. Please note the message. Changing the data type on an attribute or column that is attached to a user-defined domain is not permitted. Another clue is, again, the word calculated. So since the left model attribute column author city is associated with the user-defined domain, we can't change it. It's calculated. We can't change it. Not permitted to change it. Well, what do we want to change? We probably want to change the domain, but then that's going to open up lots of other opportunities for lots of other columns and attributes. But this really is a fundamental difference. It's not merely a data type. It's this domain association. So complete compare is going to protect us from making what we think is a small change, but it would actually turn out to be a huge change and could change many, 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 many other attributes and columns in many other models that use this template. Let's take a look at auth zip code attribute. Physical data type is different, varchar 20, varchar 9. For fun, let's just change the physical data type down here in the property view for author zip code. Let's change it to match the one on the right. And I click the left arrow and poof, it's gone away. Why? Because that's the way we have our filter buttons set up. I said, I don't want to see things that are the same. I just want to see things that are different. But remember our show resolved? I'm going to push that little show resolved filter button, and there we are. In this case, complete compare let us change the data type in the left model to match the right model, since that's the button we push, the left pointing arrow. It let us change it because the physical data type in the left model is not associated, that column and the attribute on the logical side are not associated with a user-defined domain. Of course, they're associated with a domain. I believe it's the string domain. So complete compare is going to uncover all kinds of issues for us, not just things that we can fix right here on the fly, but lots and lots and lots of things that we can, plus issues that are bigger it will draw our attention to, such as that zip code domain. But that's some interesting stuff. What about that author city? That still bothers me. It's showing in the report, and I don't want to show in the report. I've made my notes. We're going to have to review the domain. I'd like to put it away. I'd like to say, complete compare, don't bother me about that. And that's exactly what we can do. This is called a known issue. And in our toolbars up at the top left, the third row is all about known issues. The left button saves a known difference into a snapshot. So right now it's a known difference. We can have a collection of known differences that we associate with a model, and it helps us dealing with complete compares in the future. And those would be called a snapshot. Collectively, all the different known issues for that model will be called a snapshot. And every time I work with that model, once I've saved the snapshot becomes part of the model. The next button to the right, the little file folder with the file peeking out, loads the snapshot into this associated model. Third button from the left, let's mark that row or unmark it as a known difference. So first I'll mark it, and I can't unmark it because the row's gone. I've removed it from the report. Is it still a difference? Yes. It's just a difference that I know about. I understand. We're going to have to work on the domains. Fourth button from the left, show known difference items. There it is back. And see the little icon it has to the left? Circle with an upward pointing arrow inside? Auth city. I actually like to keep those on mostly. There's not generally too many of them in one resolve differences report. And the rightmost button, show differences that have changed since the last loaded snapshot. So we're working on these two models earlier, and since the last time we ran a complete compare, we've made some changes. Some of those changes might have involved known differences. And if they did, this rightmost button in our known differences toolbar will show me which things have changed since they were marked as known differences, or at least displayed as known differences in a run of complete compare. We haven't changed much, but we do have a couple more buttons to take a look at. Second row, very important stuff here. An action log, just like the action log outside of complete compare, only this time we see the action log for both models. Left model on the left and right model on the right. And notice the terminology here, copied items to left. And another one, copy items to left. You can't undo, redo, all that sort of thing from inside the action log in complete compare, but you do have the undo and redo buttons up in the top row of the toolbar. Let me close this. Look at the second button, message log. Well, no big messages of importance. The third button from the left in our second row of toolbar buttons, the left alter script schema generation button, and the right alter script. Notice the right script is grayed out. We haven't changed anything in the model on the right. Let's click on the brightened button, the one for the left model. Let's see what options are available to us here in the schema generation. For table, we have a create table. That's good. For columns, physical order, that's good. I think we've got enough options turned on to see what we want to see. We're going to fall back to our good old friend preview at the bottom. And let's see the alter script that Erwin is suggesting for our model. Alter table auth, drop constraint, and we're going to recreate the table. This time, for the auth zip code, it's our varchar 9. Remember how we pushed that from the right model over to the left? And we're going to rebuild an index, get our constraints back, referential integrity. That's cool. Notice we could right now push the generate button, but if there were any sort of changes I'd be making to a database, I'm going to want to send a copy of this script off to a friendly local database administrator. But it's a great way to review the changes that we've made here in Complete Compare. I'll click OK at the bottom right of the alter script schema generation dialog. Push the finish button. Oh, that's my snapshot. No, I don't want to save that. Notice when we come back here, anytime we come out of resolve differences, we're back to the dialog for Complete Compare, back to the wizard. Extremely handy. All the choices and selections that we had made during this Complete Compare session, just in case you hadn't saved the session, all of those changes are still right in front of us. They're sticky. Wonderful, wonderful. But we're done with this. Let me close the Complete Compare wizard. And I'm going to open up the attribute properties editor for author. Notice author zip code, varchar 20. Nothing happened. Let me just close out of here, run back into Complete Compare. Since we have not run Complete Compare again, and we haven't really changed the layout of Erwin Data Modeler, we're back to where we left off. One thing that we're going to have to change here, we've got publications and simple author. On the type selection, we're going to have to get back the type selection since I didn't save the Complete Compare session. Under Entity Table, Attribute Column, Properties, I want to make sure that we have checked Logical Data Type, because by default, the standard default option set does not have that checked. So we want to make sure we check that one. That's what we changed, right? And the standard default option set does have physical data type checked for us already. Let's push the compare button and see if we can get back to kind of where we were. Complete Compare session. Collapse and expand. And expand the table author under auth zip code. There we go. Push it to the left. It's gone, meaning what? It's been resolved. If we want to see those resolved differences, we have to turn them on in the filter button bar. Here we are. Indeed, varchar 9 has been assigned the new logical data type in the left model. Now let's push the finish button, close out of our wizard, and take a look at attribute properties for author. Ta-da! Varchar 9, a wonderful thing. So if you cancel out of your resolve differences, they do not get applied. You have to push the finish button for them to be applied. If you're trying to make changes to a database, you'll definitely want to run the alter script. So remember about known issues, remember about the reports, remember that you cannot make changes to a data type that is assigned through the association of a user-defined domain. And that's a good thing. Complete Compare should protect us from that. Remember, if you're making changes to the physical side of a model, you'll want to take a look at the alter script. And that is finally the end of Complete Compare. We've gone all the way through from how to set it up, how to run the wizard, how to maneuver, how to understand differences, even how easily to repeat the comparison today that we did last week, last month, all by saving option sets, all with saving the complete compare session, how to capture those differences and make the changes to the appropriate model. I'm glad you came along on this exploration of some of the most advanced features of Irwin Data Modeler.